And now we have Ben Tribbett, who we've been talking about you, Ben, all day. Ben is with us. Ben is a veteran Democratic political operative and consultant, both in Virginia and nationally. I've got him as one of the top 5 in the country. And Ben, an FOJ, friend of John, very good guy, and very candid always. And Ben, we've been talking about you all day. I don't know if your ears are burning. Are your ears burning, Ben? Because we've been talking about you all day. But we just had the speaker.
Who's there with
on.
you, John?
What?
Who's there with you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't introduce. This is the first segment I didn't introduce you guys after 8 segments. I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry.
Clearly, he's not listening to the show.
Yeah,
I just got out of bed. I was at MGM till late in the night.
Did you win?
Yeah, I won.
Well, could I get my money back for betting the Rams that you told me to bet, and then all those other losers? Andrew Vehorn is with us from
Ben,
the electric company co-ops and political operative on the GOP side. And Chris Saxman. Now, Chris Saxman is not a Democrat. Some people say he is. I know he's not. And he was a former House of Delegates member. He is the president of Virginia Free, a nonpartisan operation. And he's also the host of the Chris Saxman Show that runs on WJFN, 10 a.m., 1 p.m. on Mondays. And we're with Ben Tribbett. And Ben, we were talking about you all morning, and you nailed this thing, man. We just had Kirk Cox in, and here's what he said. He said, look, I'm going to give Eileen until basically the end of the day, and if she doesn't want to do this and give these women who have alleged these atrocities against them, sexual assault and rape by Justin Fairfax, he says, if they're not going to allow it, then I'm going to go forward without them, because at the end of the day, I'm the speaker, I've got a majority, I've got a lead, and I got to do the right thing. That was hot off the press 15 minutes ago. What do you think, Ben?
Well, first of all, I think it's utterly predictable that the speaker would move forward with this, and the fact that the Democrats haven't accepted his offer is political insanity. Obviously, if the speaker moves forward under, the current House organizational structure, a typical thing of referring it to the Courts of Justice Committee, for example, it would go to a committee with Republican control. Any subpoenas that wanted to be issued would be able to be issued exclusively with Republican votes. And so the speaker offered what is extremely generous by legislative standards, something that is almost unprecedented, with a couple maybe of minor exceptions, which is a even set committee to hear these charges of 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And it puts the Democrats in the cat's bird seat if they were to be willing to create such a committee and work in a bipartisan way on this, because you can't issue subpoenas on a 5-5 vote. So what the speaker was offering was extraordinarily generous to the Democrats to try to create some sort of structure that would allow this to be investigated on a bipartisan way. But if the Democrats aren't going to accept that, and they're just going to try to stifle the opposition or stifle the case, all that's going to happen is that the speaker is going to have to put this back into a committee that is Republican-controlled, because they're going to have to be able to have a majority to issue subpoenas. So this is just absolute insanity. What he offered Eileen here is essentially an equal seat at the table, so long as the Democrats are willing to come along and do this in good faith. And that's what got rejected, and that's why it's just, the word you used on the crimes here, John, atrocity, you could use the same thing on the Democrat strategy here.
Well, it doesn't make it. We're trying to figure out what exactly their strategy is, because they don't seem to have one. I guess trying to run the clock out, but there's no clock to run out, so that makes no sense to us, Ben. But I got to tell you, I got to give you credit here. You nailed this, and both Saxman and Vehorn have agreed with me. You nailed this from the beginning, starting 2 weeks ago when your friend Patrick Hope said he was going to do the impeachment proceedings, and then when he came in Monday, of course, the House Democratic caucus went crazy on him, and he had to pull it back. But Andrew, you were saying earlier that Patrick Hope had it right from 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely, Ben. How do you see this playing out? This inaction playing out in the primary season? That's one of the things that it seems like is one of the groups that would be most acutely in tune to what is happening here are Northern Virginia Democratic primary voters. How do you see this playing out over the next few months back home?
Sure. I mean, most of the legislators don't have primary challenges right now. I wouldn't be surprised if a couple others crop up because of this. But of the people who are facing primaries or in the open seats, it's being widely discussed by voters. I think that, you get past the legislators of, and the party leadership that is so focused in on, gender and race and all of these types of issues, and you get out to real people and real primary voters, and they're much more focused in on common sense things and common sense issues and what are you going to do with my schools and my roads. And when you ask them about an issue like this, primary voters have no problem differentiating between offensive behavior like what the governor and attorney general did. And by the way, they don't like what the governor and attorney general did. But they have no problem differentiating that from potential crimes. And that is an overwhelming point of view. And it's something that if these legislators come home and struggle with differentiating that to their voters, I think they could lose their election.
Wow. So you would put, there's a bunch of primaries. Barbara Frivola is being primaried. Dick Saslaw, minority leader, being primaried. There might be another one in the Petersburg area. We're going to get a take from Fightin' Joe in a minute. Saxman, you had a question for Ben.
No, what I was agreeing with Ben, and the point we made in one of the previous segments was that I think it'll bring on more primary challengers for some of the Democrats in Northern Virginia and the suburban districts who are saying, you didn't do anything. You had the chance to create a completely bipartisan investigative body, and you chose not to do that?
Chose nothing.
I mean, that would just give anyone the ammunition that they need in a primary to win a primary.
What do you think of that, Ben?
Dan, I'll tell you, there's a couple that I think are particularly vulnerable to this, but it's a question about whether or not someone would challenge them. The one that jumps to the top of the list is Rip Sullivan. He has a district full of very well-educated voters that are absolutely not going to tolerate the total silence that he has put forward on this so far.
Well, that's one right there. Ben, I want to bring in Joe Morrissey of the Fightin' Joe Morrissey Show. He's on the line. He's up at 10 a.m. after us. He's been trying to get you on his show, by the way, also. Joe, you're on here. We're at Speaker Kirk Cox's office. You're with John, Andrew Vehorn, Chris Saxman, and Ben Tribbett. So we got quite the panel here. Fightin' Joe, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me, John?
Yes, sir.
Listen, you got a great panel there, but I'm going to respectfully disagree. Ben, who I've got great admiration for in his political instincts, and Chris and the others, but here's what they're advocating. Sure, go have that bipartisan General Assembly inquiry, but look what's going to happen. You're going to have two women come in, and there will be 100 cameras in there, and these women will wax eloquently about the abuse that they sustained. And the Republicans will ask question after question that elicits more and more damning information. Now, just tell me, gentlemen, who's going to defend Fairfax? Fairfax? No, of course not. He's not going to defend himself. What are you going to get Toscano in there to act as the defense attorneys for Fairfax? Absolutely not. Name me one Democrat, because there are a bunch of sheep that will come forward and act as a counter position, cross-examine the women. Nobody will do it. It will be a disaster for Fairfax. It'll be a field day for the Republicans, and that's what they want. And my next point is, let's be clear. The Republicans, it's in their interest to keep this story going. There's nothing better for their November election than to have these two women come in and testify about the horrific act. I think it's a bad idea. And the last thing I want to say is this. The hypocrisy of the Democrats, and this is coming from a D, is slightly overwhelming. Remember, initially, all of the Democrats signed on and said, step down, Lieutenant Governor, you are bad, go home. And now they're saying, quote, I'm quoting them, we're taking the side of deliberation and due process. What silliness! First they wanted him gone. Now they want a long, deliberated due process procedure with the police investigating. That's my take.
Ben, how do you respond to that?
I mean, let's compare this to the situation we had, with the Supreme Court. And Judge Kavanaugh didn't have attorneys defending him at the hearing. He came and defended himself. He came and spoke on his own behalf and provided his own recollections. And then the public was able to decide between hearing Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh which one that they believed. And senators, heard from the public and made their decision. And it was very party line, but they were heard.
But Ben, I understand that.
I think that these two women deserve the opportunity to be heard in a public forum. They've asked for that opportunity. I think they've made a very generous offer to say that they prefer to be heard in a public forum versus filing criminal charges. That's why they haven't done that, because this is a political matter. And I think that's a very generous offer from them, given the accounts of what they said they went through. And I would just say this, comparing again to the Supreme Court, when you look at Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony, it was very serious. I mean, what she was alleging was an attempted rape, but it didn't actually occur. She left before that occurred. So what she was alleging was an attempted rape. These two women are alleging actual violent rapes, and I think that they have to have a public forum to be heard. And I just don't think that the lieutenant governors, everyone has rights in a situation like this. I believe these women's rights to be heard rises above the lieutenant governor's right to not have them heard.
All right, let me just address that. Ben, the women have been heard. Their full statements have been printed in the press. Their attorneys have had ample opportunity and have taken advantage of articulating their clients' positions. The attorney for Meredith Watson said in two parts of the statement that Justin Fairfax raped her, did not mince words, and they're going to come back in and say the same thing again. And then you have Justin Fairfax is going to sit there and then come out and say, "No, I didn't." That's going to
Joe. Do you think, Joe?
But that's what Kavanaugh did.
Like last year, did you speak out during the Supreme Court hearings to say you didn't think Dr. Ford should testify?
No, I thought that it was in fact, when they had the confirmation hearings, I said that the more people that had knowledge of these events, including other students, should come forward. But let me just say this. That is a constitutionally mandated process where you have a mandated confirmation hearing. Okay, here's what I would be happy to have, Ben. Have the women come forward. And remember, I'm an advocate of due process. I have not taken sides. Justin Fairfax is right or Professor Tyson is right. I haven't done that. I've just advocated for due process. And on that panel, that Senate confirmation panel, you had D's and R's that asked questions to get at their truth, or at least their version, what they think is the truth. Please tell me what Democrat in the House of Delegates, who has already signed on calling for Fairfax to resign, which one is going to ask pointed or relevant questions of either of these two women? Name me one person who would do that.
Well, we don't know who's on the panel yet. I think that's my point. I think it's a fair point that the House Democrats are completely spineless. There's no question about that. I think we've covered that on the show many times over many years. However, I think the fact that the House Democrats are spineless is not a reason to tell these women that they cannot make their accusations in a public venue. And I would just make one other point to what Joe said about comparing it to the Supreme Court hearings where he said it was a constitutionally mandated process. That's exactly why Delegate Hope was correct right from the start that this should be an impeachment process that's opened up, not to guarantee that impeachment would occur, but that the House would open this as an impeachment investigation, because that is also a constitutional process, and I think this does rise to a constitutional process.
Well, I got to tell you, Ben, we questioned Patrick Hope 2 weeks ago, right here on this show, that we thought he was jumping the gun and we thought it was politically motivated. And I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I think you did the right thing. So it has been fascinating to hear my two good friends, Democrats, Ben Tribbett and Joe Morrissey, debate this. Now we have our panel here, and we're going to take a quick public vote as to who won that exchange, so we can kind of start the dialogue right now. Joe Morrissey or Ben Tribbett, who got the better of that? And do you think there should be a hearing or not? Let's start with Andrew. Yes or no?
I think Joe brings very valid points about who is going to be the defense advocate on that panel. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say, I mean, they're not in conflict. Mm-hmm. They're both saying the same thing. Ben is saying the Democratic caucus is neutered and feckless, and Joe is saying, yeah, that's my point. That's why this can't be a fair process.
Mm-hmm. So should they have it or not?
I think you're at a point where they have to.
They're going to.
Chris?
They're going to have the process. It's going to happen.
Well, let's get back to first. Who won the argument?
I think they both made good points. I don't think there's a debate there. I think they both, to Andrew's point, made good points, and they'll go forward. Here's the thing: no one. There was no defense counsel for Kavanaugh. There was an attorney who questioned her, who was not a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. They brought in an outside counsel and said, "Please question this person," and it was a female. So it was female on female. But
Chris, here's the point: you had Republican senators that were on the judicial panel that asked questions that were, in essence, a defense of Kavanaugh.
Right.
You had Democrats on the panel that asked questions, I'll call them lobs, volleys, that she could smash, that were in defense of the victim. Therefore, somewhere in between, the truth would emerge. But in this situation, you would have many Republicans asking questions of these women that would get the women's position out there. But can you imagine what Dave Toscano asking questions to elicit the side of Justin Fairfax? It just would not happen.
Because he's already called for the resignation of the lieutenant governor. The Republicans in the Senate didn't call for Brett Kavanaugh to step down from the proceedings to become Supreme Court justice. It's a totally different scenario. The Democrats are already so far out on the branch; they have to do the investigation and be part of the prosecution. They've called for his resignation. You can't walk that back.
So what you guys are saying is, if you took Cox's agreement, Kirk Cox's agreement of 10 people on the courts and justice, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, Fairfax would have 10 adversaries. Is that what you're saying?
There you go. Spot on. That's
Thank
my
you.
point.
What was that?
Okay, so if you take Kirk Cox's compromise, which was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, courts and justice, what Joe Morrissey is saying, and I think we're all, which I'm agreeing with, is because the Democrats have already called for Fairfax to resign, Fairfax he'd be facing 10 adversaries. He'd have no advocates for him. So, I mean, why would he want to do that if you got 10 adversaries?
Let me jump in here, John.
I don't know how you don't. I mean, if you're called by the House, you're called.
But he's got 10. Well,
tough. This is it.
What Joe is saying is it isn't fair.
It doesn't have to be fair. That's the whole point. I mean, they've already called for resignation. They've already jumped the shark on that one. They said, "Oh no, he's got to go." You didn't want to hear the facts, so you're already out there. They have boxed themselves in.
Go ahead, Ben.
This is a little bit absurd because, yes, we don't know what position people on that committee will have going into the hearing. That having been said, there are 100 delegates. And what about a hypothetical scenario where an impeachment proceeding was beginning where all 100 people thought the person should be removed? Let's say, for example, the governor walked out on the street and shot some of the reporters, okay? And everyone said the governor should be removed. He just shot reporters on the street. Does that mean that we couldn't have an impeachment hearing on it because everyone would be an adversary against the governor's witness? Of course not. the whole purpose of why you need an impeachment hearing is it's for these 100 delegates to decide. And if Justin Fairfax's conduct has led him not to have support among those 100 delegates, that's because of his conduct. He doesn't have a constitutional right to having some of the delegates be supportive of him. That's not how this works.
That's right.
Hey,
He's
Ben,
right.
let me ask you this.
This is not a court of law.
If I were defending Justin Fairfax, here's the people that I would want to subpoena, assuming arguendo that the House has subpoena power, which they've never exercised before in the 400-year history of the GA. But I would want to subpoena the Duke basketball player that Meredith Watson alleged also raped her and who has denied it. I would want to subpoena a Duke administrator who would testify that, no, we never got a complaint from Meredith Watson, although she said she complained about the Duke basketball rapist. I would want to subpoena her classmates or her roommates from that time to see if she ever voiced a modicum of concern about being sexually assaulted. In other words, I'm thinking about those people that could shed light on the situation. And for the life of me, I don't know how you get those witnesses before the panel. I believe, and Ben, got great admiration for your strategic skills. I really do. But I just see this as being an absolute disaster for Fairfax.
I agree.
Too bad.
I agree with you, but it's up to him to bring in those witnesses on his own.
Too bad. I mean,
he's got to call those on his own. He can hire counsel.
Yeah.
He can hire. He's got
I'm
good.
with
people.
I'm with Ben. Joe, love you. I'm with Ben on this. I think Ben has nailed it. I think you have to have this hearing, and too bad if it's not fair. I mean, he's got a right to bring people in and subpoena people and do what he has to do. But I don't know how you just adjourn the General Assembly and say, "See you later."
We don't do
I
anything.
just don't know how you do that.
It's
Hey,
political
guys,
malpractice.
let me ask you one final question.
Yes.
Do you, Ben, or Chris, do any of you really believe that the Republicans want Justin Fairfax out of that seat? Or because if he were to step down today, the governor anoints, say, Jennifer McClellan with no baggage, all right? Don't you really believe that the Republicans would prefer to have Justin Fairfax as the lieutenant governor going into November elections so that they can use that bullet against these in their